You listen to EKKE's podcasts, produced by the National Center for Social Research of Greece. The workshop, Far-Right Extremism and Democracy in a Comparative Perspective, Europe and Latin America, took place in Athens, 11 to 13 September 2024, and was organized by the European Consortium for Political Research, Standing Groups Extremism and Democracy and Latin American Politics, EKKE and Pantheon University. On the sidelines of the workshop, EKKE's podcasts recorded the thoughts and ideas of several participants. 4 thought-provoking questions were raised during the workshop's opening day. Is the far right a global phenomenon? What is causing it? What are the implications for democracy? What can we learn from comparing Europe and Latin America? These were also the focus of EKKE's podcasts, where our guests presented their ideas and arguments.
We now give the floor to Léonie de Jonge, Assistant Professor in European Politics and Society at the University of Groningen, researching far-right politics.
I'm a political scientist by training, and I look at the far right and specifically what to do about it. What is the far right? How does it operate in different countries and regions? And in Europe, we have a lot of experience with this. Far right has been around for quite some time. And what I'm trying to do in my paper is to draw out some lessons of having dealt with the far right for several decades now. What do we learn? How do you respond to the far right? And can we distill any lessons or strategies that work particularly well or don't work at all? My title is Lessons from Europe with a question mark, because I don't think we are particularly good in Europe at dealing with the far right. We have some really good examples of places where the far right is not successful. So anti-fascist mobilization in particular, locally in Greece, for instance, is very strong. And we learned from some research that this can be very effective in countering the far right. But what I want to try to do is zoom out a little bit and think systematically about different ways in countering the far right, which means who should counter the far right? Is it politicians, political parties, for instance, mainstream political parties? Is it the media, journalists, are they the ones to counter the far right? Or is it civil society? For instance, the anti-fascist mobilization, grassroots counter-mobilization, initiatives to strengthen democracy. I think in my paper I try to argue that actually it's a little bit of everything. Different actors need to be doing their job in strengthening democracy and also countering far-right actors. The church would fall under civil society organizations. So this third type of actor that I identify. There's really interesting research that says that active church going, so not just saying you are this or this religion, but actively going to church serves as some sort of a vaccination against the far right. But we also see that, for instance, evangelical communities in Brazil, but also in the US, are particularly fond of the far right, of Bolsonaro. And in Greece, this might also be the case. So one of the countries that I focus on is Belgium. Belgium is a really, really crazy, strange country because it's one country, but it's actually like 2 countries in one. You have a northern Dutch-speaking region, Flanders, which has one of the strongest historically far-right movements in all of Europe, with the Vlaams Blok grew out of the Flemish movement, now the Vlaams Belang. And then you have the south of the country, the French-speaking part, Wallonia, where the far right is not present at all. It cannot really break through. And this is really a fascinating question for a comparativist like myself. So as a political scientist, we don't have laboratories where we can do experiments, but Belgium is almost like a living lab because we have a southern region where the breeding ground is perfect for the far right to break through, but it doesn't. And in my research, I look at why. And one of the reasons there is, and I come back to these counter strategies, is the media and mainstream political parties, they are very effective at isolating the far right. So really drawing strict boundaries in how much tolerance they want to grant to intolerance. And this proves to be a very effective counter mechanism. What's important though is the timing. The fact that these actors have these very rigid cordons sanitaires before the party breaks through, that is why it's so effective. So I'm not sure to what extent this lesson can be exported to countries like Greece, which has much more experience with the far right. When the far right is already present, I think it becomes it changes the parameters of political competition and it becomes more difficult to counteract. What unites these actors across the world? So this is one of the big questions that motivates us and drives us. Ideologically, I think they do have things in common. Two things I think that are very important are they're all exclusionary in some way. They exclude certain types of groups of people. In some cases, like in Latin America, it's more LGBTQ people, women, for instance. In Europe, it's more directed against, in the Netherlands, for instance, Muslim minorities or immigrants more generally. So the way in which it manifests, it looks a bit different, but on the inside, it's the same. It's exclusionary. And the second point is it's hierarchical. It's always deeply hierarchical. It sees society as a strictly ordered thing. It doesn't believe in equality, but in inequality and hierarchical structures with strong leaders, often a strong man on the top, to lead society and keep everything in order, which also means that those on the top are somehow better suited or equipped to lead than those to follow. So these two things I think the far right has in common across the globe. Nationalism is always inward-looking. And we used to think that nationalist parties, because they are nationalist and they want their own nation to be better, to come first, right? America first, the Netherlands first. We used to think that because they are nationalist and inward-looking, they cannot be internationalists. So we used to think there can be no such thing as a nationalist internationalist. But over the years, what we've seen is there can be such a thing. They can work together. And it's exactly because of these ideological commonalities. They do have, in Europe, for instance, they do share a common vision on Europe. They also learn from each other quite a lot. So they like to exchange strategies. And because they're often shunned and excluded at the local or the national level, they like to go at the European level to say, look, here in the European Union, we are not shunned. The Belgian case is interesting. The Flemish Interest Party, the Vlaams Belang, it is excluded from power in Belgium. But in Europe, it likes to go and say, look, here is a photo with me and Orban. I am a recognized player. So we see that more so than in the past, they are looking for each other internationally. Also because they're trying to lift of each other's success. In the past, they used to not want to be tainted with the stigma of extremism of other parties. And now, because they are more and more normalized, they like to sort of lift off of the success of each other. So there is such a thing as a brown network. There is such a thing as a nationalist international. And that is also part of the phenomena that we're trying to understand and study. How do they connect? What is the transnational far right?